What's going on, guys? Seth here from Team Union Seth. I am here for Week 3, our Week 3 battle in the RPL Season 2.5, our Little Cup Off-Season League, and I'm your coach of the Philadelphia Spearows. So this is our Week 3 battle. We're going up against the Goodlettsville Goomys. If you did not check out the team builder, make sure you check that out. I will link it in the description, as well as a card will come up right now, so you can check that out. But unfortunately, this one had to be post-commed. I've been having a lot of issues with OBS, so like recording the videos lately, and yeah, it's really unfortunate. It sucks, but I'm figuring stuff out. I think it's the hotkeys that I'm picking. I'm actually using during the battle, which is turning the recording on and off. So I don't know exactly. It sucks, but this one is going to be post-commed as well. We should have the issues all figured out. I can't promise anything because mistakes happen, but we should have the issues all sorted out after this week. So, as you can see, I brought the Natu, Purloin, Rhyhorn, Mareanie, Munchlax, and Axew, as my opponent actually brought the Grubbin, Goomy, Zorua, Duskull, Tortuga, and Riolu. Now, I didn't think my opponent would bring the Grubbin. I didn't think they'd bring the Riolu. We did not see Torchic, did not see Diglett, so definitely a few threats that I expected to come that didn't come, but we shall get right into the battle. So, oh, and no Pineco either. So, I did end up deciding to lead with my Natu anyway. I did decide to lead with my Natu anyway, just because I thought it was a decent lead if my opponent decided to lead with the Tortuga. But they lead with the Grubbin, and I just go for the U-turn as I bring in my Rhyhorn, predicting some sort of electric move. However, my opponent goes for the HP, I believe it was Ice, the Hidden Power Ice. I decided to stay in and take another one in order to get up my rocks, because my opponent's only hazard removal, I believe that Tortuga gets Rapid Spin. Don't quote me on that, but I believe it does. If not, he has no hazard removal. So I switch out, wanting to keep my Rhyhorn for a potential sack into my Munchlax to eat that hit. Now this turn, I was predicting my opponent to switch out into Duskull. So I doubled into Purloin, predicting that, and my opponent goes for the Thunder Wave and follows it up with an Electro Web. So now I'm -1 speed, I'm paralyzed, so I just knock this thing off, get rid of its Guava Berry, which my opponent actually didn't know he could use a second Berry Juice, but my opponent goes for another Electro Web as I get my Berry Juice back, and I go for the U-turn to knock this Grubbin out and switch into something else that I want to use. So I decided to go back into my Natu, just because I'm Scarfed, I can get momentum. Now my opponent brings in the Duskull, and I was a little kind of weirded that my opponent would bring in the Duskull, so I was like, alright, I think this is the Zorua, as it does turn out to be the Zorua. So I go back into Natasha to potentially U-turn and take this thing out, but my opponent goes for the Shadow Ball as I switch into my Purloin. So I go for the U-turn, trying to knock the thing out, but my opponent goes into the Riolu on the switch, so I just double back into my Natu, and I can pretty freely fire off a Psychic if I really wanted to, which is exactly what I ended up going for. I didn't think my opponent would want to go back into Zorua, so I double into Purloin, predicting my opponent to go into the Zorua. However, my opponent goes for the Copycat, copies Psychic, and it's not effective anyway. So my opponent just goes for a Bullet Punch as I go for an Encore. So locking my opponent into Bullet Punch, potentially predicting a Detect. So I double into my Mareanie because I know that this thing is locked into Bullet Punch. It won't be able to touch me, and I can pretty freely get up a T-Spike. So I get up. I do end up getting up my Toxic Spike as my opponent switches in the Zorua, still disguised as the Duskull. So I double into my Munchlax, thinking that I'll take this hit a lot better than I actually did. So this Net Night Daze does 50% to my pretty specially bulky Munchlax as I get my Berry Juice back, get to full health, and at this point I'm just going to sack off my Purloin, just so I can get a free switch into my Natu, which is Scarfed. It'll outspeed this thing, because I think at this point I figured out it wasn't Scarfed. So I just U-turn, I knock out the Zorua, and I'm able to U-turn into, I believe, my Munchlax? No, my Mareanie. So I go into my Mareanie, as my opponent brings out the real Duskull. So now, at this point, I don't really want to stay in here, so I just double into my Rhyhorn, sacking it off so I can get a free switch in to Munchlax, actually. But my opponent goes for the Calm Mind. So I go for a Rock Blast and miss, just trying to get off some damage. Didn't really matter that much, but my opponent goes for the Hex and does knock out my Rhyhorn, as I do switch into my Natu at this point. So I switch into Natu so that I can trick my opponent, my Choice Scarf, because I either want to lock him into another Calm Mind or into the Hex, which is what my opponent ends up going for, and it doesn't actually knock me out. So at this point, I double into Munchlax, knowing my opponent is locked into the Hex, as he switches out to the Riolu. So kind of a bad play on my part. I didn't see the Riolu's entire moveset at this point. However, it turns out that it doesn't actually have a fighting move. So it ends up just going for a Toxic, which is the last move we see on the moveset, as I switch into my Mareanie, so obviously it does not affect me. So at this point, I'm just going to go for a Poison Jab. I know this thing cannot touch me, and he does decide to just stay in. So we get the Poison Jab off, does a big chunk of damage, and my opponent does get knocked out from the poison damage. We see the Tortuga coming here. Now, I expected this to be a Shell Smash variant and max speed, so it would outspeed my Mareanie. So I go for a Haze, although I am faster, that I find out. So my opponent goes for the knockoff. So kind of a misplay on my part, but it wasn't that bad. So my opponent goes for the knockoff, gets rid of the Eviolite, and I just decide to recover up. So I get the recover off because another knockoff isn't going to do a whole lot. And I think I looked it up. I think this thing does get Earthquake, but it didn't knock me out, and I wanted to scout for that. So I just go for a Poison Jab, chipping this thing down even more as my opponent goes for a straight up Dig. And at this point, I'm just going to switch out to my Natu because obviously I'm flying type. The Dig isn't going to affect it. And then I can outspeed, hit it with a Psychic, and knock it out pretty easily. So we do see the Dig come off, take a little bit of chip damage from the Poison. I go for the Psychic, knocking this thing out as my opponent, all he has left is the Duskull, and I'm feeling pretty good in this position. I'm sorry, the Goomy and the Duskull. Now the Goomy comes in. I do decide to just Psychic it to get off some chip damage because I don't really need not to anymore. It doesn't do a whole lot against the Goomy or the Duskull, as my opponent decides to go for an Outrage, which is not going to do anything to my Mareanie even without the Eviolite. So I do go into my Mareanie knowing this thing is locked into Outrage. He can't switch. So I just decide to go for the Poison Jab, knocking it out, waiting for that Duskull to come in. And at this point, like I said, Duskull can't do much to Mareanie, let alone the rest of my team, especially with a Choice Scarf. So my opponent just decides to go for the Facade, so scarfs himself into Facade as I go for a Poison Jab, and I do actually end up getting the Poison, which is going to power up Facade, so kind of mattered a little bit, but not too much, as the Facade is not doing enough where it's going to do 50%, so I can recover off damage as my opponent does take more poison damage. This goes on for a couple turns. As you can see here, I'm recovering off the damage, and I believe it was this turn I decided to just go for the, oh no, I go for another recover. So next turn, I do decide to just go for the Poison Jab, thinking that it will knock out the Duskull from this range, because I can live another Facade. So I live the Facade, go for the Poison Jab. It doesn't actually knock out the Duskull. However, the Poison Jab the Poison from the Poison Jab before does end up knocking it out. So we take this one in a 3-0. Pretty decent game on my part. I thought I played pretty well. My prep was actually a lot. I prepped really well for my playstyle, I believe. So more bulky offense with one or two really offensive mons. So I felt very comfortable with the team, and I think that's part of the reason I was so comfortable playing with it and making predictions and just being comfortable making plays and not feeling like I was controlling the risk as much as I needed to. So I felt like I played a pretty good game, but let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Next week, or the next battle, the next few battles for the RPL should be live comm, like usual, but so again, I apologize for this one not being live comm, but things happen. So thank you guys again so much for watching. Make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.